I never thought I would be telling my story here. I never thought I would question everything I was raised to believe. And I never thought I would die, cross over, and meet the one person I had spent my entire life denying. But it happened. My name is Amina, and I was born and raised in Iran. I was a devout Muslim, a faithful wife, and a mother of 2 beautiful children. I lived my life according to the teachings of Islam, obeying every command, praying 5 times a day, fasting during Ramadan, and covering myself as a sign of obedience. I believed I was on the right path. I believed that my faith was the truth. But then, I died. I remember everything. The moment my body failed me, the terror of leaving this world, and the strange, weightless feeling of drifting away. And then, I saw him. It wasn't Allah. It wasn't who I expected. It was Jesus. And what he told me changed everything. I came back to tell you the truth, but the truth is dangerous. And the moment I spoke it, my life became a nightmare. This is my testimony, and if you're watching this, it's not an accident. What I'm about to share may shake you to your core. It may terrify you, but you need to hear it before it's too late. Before everything happened, before I died, before I saw what I saw, I was just an ordinary woman trying to live a good life. From the moment I could speak, I was taught that Islam was the only truth, that Allah was the one true God, and that Muhammad was his final messenger. My parents were devout, and they made sure that I followed the teachings of the Quran without question. As a child, I didn't question anything. I prayed 5 times a day, memorized verses, and fasted during Ramadan. I covered my hair in public and obeyed every rule. My mother told me that to be a good Muslim woman, I had to submit to my family, to my husband, to Allah. By the time I was 16, I was already promised to be married. My husband, Farid, was 10 years older than me. He was a good man by society's standards, hardworking, respected in our community, but he was strict. Love wasn't something that was discussed in our marriage. My duty was to be a good wife, to bear children, and to never bring shame to our household. For years, I told myself that I was happy, that this was life, that this was how things were supposed to be. But deep inside, something never felt right. I remember small moments of doubt, times when I would hear whispers in my mind, asking questions I was too afraid to speak aloud. Why does Allah feel so distant? Why do I feel empty, even when I pray? Why do I fear him more than I love him? But I silenced those thoughts, because doubt was dangerous. Doubt could get me killed. So I buried it. I went about my days, caring for my 2 children, preparing meals, attending gatherings with other women in the neighborhood, and doing my best to be the kind of wife my husband expected me to be. Yet, no matter how much I obeyed, how much I prayed, or how much I tried to convince myself that I was happy, I wasn't. Something inside me was restless, like a small flame trying to break free from the darkness, but I buried it deep inside my heart. On a normal day, I was preparing dinner for my family. The scent of saffron and roasted lamb filled the kitchen as I stirred the pot, my mind occupied with the usual thoughts: what my husband would say about the food, whether my children had finished their studies, and whether I had performed all my prayers correctly that day. But something felt off. There was a strange heaviness in my chest, a discomfort I couldn't quite place. I ignored it, telling myself it was just exhaustion. Then, suddenly, it hit me. A searing pain, sharp and unforgiving, shot through my chest. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just discomfort. It was crushing, suffocating, as if something was squeezing the very life out of me. My hands trembled as I grabbed the edge of the counter for support. My vision blurred, my knees weakened, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. Then came the dizziness. The room spun. The walls seemed to collapse inward, and my breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. I tried to call out to my husband, to my children, but no words came out. The pain grew worse, an unbearable pressure that made every heartbeat feel like an explosion inside my chest. And then, I collapsed. The sound of my body hitting the floor seemed distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I could hear faint voices, my husband shouting my name, my children crying. But they were slipping away, growing fainter by the second. I felt hands on my face, shaking me, but I couldn't respond. My vision darkened. My body grew cold. A terrifying realization gripped me. I was dying. Panic surged through me, but there was nothing I could do. No prayer could stop this. No amount of faithfulness could undo what was happening. Everything around me faded. My husband's voice, the warmth of my home, the weight of my body. Then, all at once, silence. Everything went black. For a moment, there was nothing. No pain, no fear, just emptiness. And then, I opened my eyes. But I wasn't in my body anymore. At first, I didn't understand what had happened. I was still in my home. But something was different. I could see my husband kneeling over my body, shaking me desperately. I could see my children crying, their little hands clutching at my lifeless arm. I saw myself lying there, eyes half open, face drained of color, completely still. But I wasn't inside my body anymore. I was above it. I was floating, weightless, looking down at the scene unfolding below me. A strange calmness settled over me. The panic, the pain, the suffocation. It was all gone. I felt light, as if I had been freed from something heavy. And yet, fear lurked at the edges of my mind. Was this death? I tried to speak, to call out to my husband, but no sound came from my lips. Then, I noticed something. A pull, an invisible force, gentle yet commanding, was drawing me upward. I turned my gaze away from my lifeless body and looked above me. That's when I saw it. A tunnel. It stretched endlessly into the sky, filled with a warm, golden light. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Radiant, inviting, almost alive. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. And then, I started to rise. I didn't walk. I didn't move my legs. I was simply pulled, effortlessly, weightlessly, toward the tunnel. For a moment, I felt no fear, no sorrow, no regrets, just an overwhelming sense of home. But then, just as I was about to cross into the tunnel, something changed. A darkness appeared at the edges of my vision, creeping in like ink spilling through water. And then, I heard it. A voice. One I had never heard before, but one that filled me with absolute dread. It was deep, guttural, filled with malice. "She is ours." Suddenly, I felt a force grab me. Something cold, powerful, and suffocating. It yanked me backward, pulling me away from the tunnel and into the growing darkness. Terror gripped me. I tried to fight, to resist, but I was powerless. I was being dragged into something horrible. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't going to heaven. I was going somewhere else, somewhere I never thought I would end up. And I had no way to stop it. Darkness swallowed me. The warm light of the tunnel faded as I was pulled downward into a suffocating abyss. A force I couldn't see wrapped itself around me, dragging me away from everything I had ever known. I couldn't scream. I couldn't fight. I was completely powerless. The deeper I went, the colder it became. The air was thick, pressing against me like an unbearable weight. Shadows slithered around me, whispering in voices I didn't recognize, their words filled with hatred and accusation. "You don't belong to him. You were never worthy. You are ours now." Their voices weren't just words. They were truths being spoken directly into my soul. And the worst part? I believed them. I had spent my life devoted to prayer, to faith, to rituals that I thought would bring me closer to God. But now, in this place, it all felt meaningless. Had I been wrong? Was this my true fate? The shadows tightened around me, dragging me faster. I could hear distant screams, agonized, tormented, endless. And then the heat began. A blistering wave of fire erupted around me, though there were no flames I could see. The pain was unbearable, as if my very soul was being scorched. I had never known fear like this before. I had never known despair like this before. I was losing myself. Then, suddenly, a voice, not from the shadows, not from the whispers, but from above. A voice that cut through the darkness like a sword. I didn't know what was said, but the entire abyss shook. The voices screamed. The force that held me let go. And then, a light erupted, blinding, radiant, fierce. It wasn't just light, it was power. It was authority. The shadows shrank back, writhing and screeching in agony as the brightness consumed them. And then, I saw him. At first, I couldn't process what I was looking at. The light was too intense, overwhelming in a way that defied human understanding. But then, the light became a form. A man. No, not just a man. Something more. Something beyond. He stood before me, clothed in light itself. His very presence radiated a power that I had never encountered before. It was like standing before eternity itself. And then, I saw his eyes. They held something I couldn't explain. Something terrifying, yet unbelievably beautiful. It was as if they saw through everything I had ever done, everything I had ever thought, every prayer, every doubt, every secret. And yet, there was no hatred in them, no condemnation, only truth, only love. Tears filled my eyes as I fell to my knees, unable to withstand the weight of his presence. And then, he spoke. Amina. He knew my name. The way he said it, it wasn't just a name. It was my entire being wrapped in a single word. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I could only listen. And then, he said something that shattered everything I thought I knew. I am the way, the truth, and the life. His words echoed through me, piercing me deeper than anything ever had before. I knew this phrase. I had heard it before, but I had never believed it. Tears streamed down my face as he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, yet somehow gentle. You searched for me, he said, his voice both thunderous and tender. But you did not know it was me you were searching for. I trembled. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say that I knew God, that I had been faithful. But in that moment, standing before him, I realized the truth. I hadn't known him, not really. And then, he reached out his hand. The moment he touched me, everything changed. A flood of memories, visions, and revelations poured into me all at once. I saw who he truly was. I saw the sacrifice. I saw the cross. I saw his blood. And I knew. Jesus. It was Jesus. Not just a prophet. Not just a messenger. He was the Son of God. He was the only way. And then, everything went white. A warmth unlike anything I had ever known wrapped around me. And in that moment, I knew what true love felt like for the first time. I had been searching my whole life. And now, I had found him. Or rather, he had found me. The weight of his presence was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just overwhelming, it was consuming. Every part of me, every memory, every sin, every hidden thought was suddenly laid bare before him. And yet I didn't feel condemned. I felt seen. I felt known. I felt loved. The warmth of his hand on my forehead sent a current of energy through me. It wasn't painful, but it was unbearably intense, as if I were standing in the presence of a power so vast, so infinite, that my human mind couldn't fully grasp it. And then I saw, not with my physical eyes, but with something deeper. A vision unfolded before me, not like a dream, but as if I were standing inside history itself. I was no longer in the blinding white presence of Jesus. Instead, I was standing at the foot of a hill. The sky was dark, as if the sun had been blotted out. The air was thick with dust and sorrow. And then I saw him. Jesus. Not the radiant, glorified Jesus who had stood before me just moments ago, but a man beaten beyond recognition. His body was covered in blood. His face was swollen, bruised. His hands and feet were nailed to a rough wooden cross. The iron spikes had been driven straight through his flesh, and yet he wasn't screaming in pain. Instead, he looked down at the people below him with eyes full of love. I saw Roman soldiers gambling over his clothes. I saw religious leaders standing with cold expressions, whispering to one another in mockery. And then I saw her, a woman, weeping, holding onto another man for support. I knew who she was. It was his mother. And the pain in her eyes, it was unbearable. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to say something to stop this from happening. But then I heard his voice. It wasn't the mighty, thunderous voice that had shaken the abyss. It was weaker now, software hoarse from pain. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The moment I heard those words, my heart shattered, because I realized he was talking about me too. I was part of them, the people he was pleading for, the ones who had been blind to who he truly was. Tears streamed down my face as I fell to my knees, staring up at him in complete agony. I wanted to scream. I wanted to undo everything. I wanted to take his place, but I couldn't, because he had already done it. For me, for all of us. I had spent my life believing that Jesus was only a prophet, a great teacher, a righteous man. But now I knew the truth. He wasn't just a prophet. He wasn't just a man. He was the Lamb, the sacrifice, God himself wrapped in flesh. And he had suffered this because of his love for us. I couldn't stop weeping. Everything I had ever believed, everything I had ever been taught, it was all crumbling before my eyes, because the truth was right in front of me, nailed to a cross, dying for my sins. Then, the ground shook, the sky tore open, lightning flashed, and a voice so powerful that the entire earth seemed to tremble beneath it, thundered through the heavens. It is finished. And then, darkness. I gasped as I was pulled back into the blinding white light. Jesus stood before me once again, whole and radiant, the wounds of the cross now healed. I was shaking, sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't even form words, but I didn't need to. He knew everything I wanted to say. "You have seen the truth," he said gently. "Now you must choose." I looked up at him, my entire soul trembling. Choose? Choose what? I had spent my entire life believing that I already knew God, that I was already on the right path. But now everything was different. I had seen the cross. I had seen him. I had felt the truth. I thought about my family, my husband, my children, my parents. Would they believe me? Could I even tell them? Jesus stepped closer, kneeling down so that he was at eye level with me. "Amina, I love you." His voice was so full of love, so full of tenderness, that I broke down all over again. "I have always loved you, even when you did not know me, even when you did not believe in me, even when you were far from me, I was near to you." I could barely breathe. the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one I had spent my life rejecting. He had been with me all along. I felt something inside of me break. The lies I had believed, the barriers I had built, the fear of being wrong. It all fell away, and in its place was Him, truth, love, salvation. I didn't deserve it. I had done nothing to earn it. And yet, He gave it freely. Tears pouring down my face, I whispered the only words I could manage. Jesus, forgive me. His face lit up. The warmth around me intensified, wrapping me in something so pure, so holy, that I thought my very soul might melt. And then, He reached out, placed His hand over my heart, and whispered, "It is done." At that moment, a force rushed through me, unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was like fire and peace all at once, like life itself had just been breathed into me. I felt new. And then, everything vanished. When the light vanished, I found myself somewhere else. It wasn't heaven. It wasn't earth. It was a place I couldn't fully comprehend, a realm between realms. I stood on what felt like solid ground, yet it wasn't made of stone, nor dirt, nor anything earthly. It was as if I were standing on pure light. Around me stretched an endless expanse of space, neither dark nor bright, but pulsing with an otherworldly glow. And then, I saw them. Countless souls, drifting, wandering, crying out. Some were reaching forward as if clawing at something unseen, desperate to escape. Others stood frozen in place, their eyes wide with a horror I couldn't fully describe. Their mouths opened and closed, but no sound came from them. A terrible, suffocating feeling settled over me. This was not peace. This was torment. I turned to Jesus, who stood beside me, his expression filled with sorrow. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice shaking. He looked at the suffering souls with deep sadness. "This is the place of those who rejected me," he said. "The place of those who refused the truth, even when it was revealed to them." I couldn't breathe. I had always believed in Jahannam, hell, as it was taught to me, a place of fire, a place where the worst sinners were sent for their crimes. But this was different. There was no fire, no demons with chains, only separation, a deep, endless separation from God. And somehow I knew this was far worse than any physical punishment, because these souls, they knew. They knew who Jesus was. They knew the truth. But it was too late. A deep wailing filled the space, though no mouths moved. It was a spiritual anguish, a kind of despair that went beyond flesh and blood. I saw a man fall to his knees, his hands clutching his face as though trying to block out what he had finally realized. His body shook with regret. I saw a woman standing still, staring ahead with empty eyes. There were tears on her face, but she never moved. She was lost. And then, I saw someone I knew. I gasped, my heart pounding violently in my chest. It was an imam, a man I had respected my entire life. Someone who had led countless prayers at the mosque. Someone who had taught me to deny Jesus. His eyes met mine, and I will never forget the horror in them. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Tears streamed down his face as he shook his head violently, his hands reaching toward me, pleading. But I didn't know what to do. I turned to Jesus, weeping. "Please," I begged. "Can't they be saved?" His eyes were full of love, but also pain. They had their chance. I felt my soul break. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull them out. I wanted to tell them it wasn't too late. But it was. It was too late. The reality crushed me with such force that I fell to the ground, sobbing. I had been on the same path. I had been so close to ending up here. If I had died even a few moments earlier, I would have been among them, lost, hopeless, separated from God forever. I felt Jesus' hand on my shoulder, and suddenly, the place of separation vanished. I was back in the place of light, but I couldn't stop crying. Jesus, I don't understand, I sobbed. I thought I was following God. I thought I was doing the right thing. How could I have been so wrong? He knelt beside me, his presence wrapping around me like a shield of peace. Amina, you sought truth with all your heart, he said, and that is why you were given the chance to see. I looked up at him, my entire being trembling. What must I do? His gaze was firm but gentle. Tell them the truth about me. Tell them what you have seen. My heart nearly stopped. Tell them? Tell my family? Tell my husband? My parents? Tell my entire community that Jesus was not just a prophet, but the Son of God? I imagined their faces, their anger, their disappointment, the danger. They would think I had lost my mind. They would think I had betrayed them. I knew what happened to people who left Islam. I had heard the stories. People were beaten, banished, even killed. Jesus must have seen the fear in my heart, because he reached out and said, "Do not be afraid, Amina." His voice carried power, authority, but also a love deeper than the ocean. I will be with you. Tears blurred my vision, my chest tightening with emotion. I wanted to obey, but I was terrified. Jesus smiled softly, and then he did something that changed me forever. He placed his hand over my heart for the second time. The moment he touched me, a fire ignited inside me. It wasn't painful. It was holy. It burned away my doubts, my fears, my hesitations, until all that was left was him, his truth, his love, his power. I gasped as a rush of energy filled my being. And then, everything went black. The next thing I heard was a loud, piercing sound. I gasped, my chest heaving violently as my lungs sucked in air that wasn't supposed to be there. There were screams all around me. Not the tormented wails of the lost souls I had just seen, but human screams. Confused, panicked, and terrified. I tried to move, but my entire body felt heavy, weak, foreign. I blinked rapidly, my vision adjusting to the harsh white lights above me. A strong smell of antiseptic filled my nose. Machines were beeping frantically. Then I saw them. Doctors, nurses, my husband, my parents, all of them standing around my hospital bed, their eyes wide, their faces frozen in a mixture of horror and shock. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, raw, aching. What happened? Had it all been a dream? Had I really died? Before I could process anything, a doctor, an older man with gray at his temples, stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of surgical tools. He looked at me like I was a ghost. Another nurse was trembling, her hands pressed over her mouth. "It's not possible," someone whispered. "She was dead," another voice muttered. I checked myself. No pulse, no brain activity. We called it dead. The word sent a shiver through me, because it was true. I had been dead, and now I was back. The machines were still blaring, doctors scrambling in disbelief. I saw my mother, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her scarf. My father stood rigid, his knuckles white as he held onto the rail of my bed. But it was my husband's face that caught my attention the most. His dark eyes, usually full of confidence, were filled with something I had never seen before: fear. His gaze locked onto mine like he was looking at a stranger, like he didn't know me anymore. And in that moment, I realized he didn't. Because the woman who had died was not the same woman who had returned. Something inside me had changed. And the moment I opened my mouth, that change would be known. It took hours for the panic in the hospital room to settle. Doctors ran test after test, murmuring to each other about medical impossibilities. They whispered about how my heart had stopped for over 30 minutes, how there was no logical reason for me to be alive. They called it a miracle. But I knew the truth. It wasn't just a miracle. It was Jesus. I wanted to tell them all. But before I could even form the words, my mother gripped my hand tightly, her face still ashen. "Amina," she said, her voice shaking, "do not say anything reckless. Just thank Allah that He has given you back your life." My breath caught in my throat. She was already warning me. Even though I hadn't spoken a word yet, but I had to tell them. I turned to my husband. "I saw something," I said softly. His jaw tensed. "What are you talking about?" I swallowed hard. My body still felt weak, but I forced myself to sit up, looking between my parents and my husband. "I saw Jesus." A heavy silence fell over the room. My father stiffened, his face darkening instantly. My mother flinched as if I had just cursed, and my husband, his face twisted in disbelief and anger. "Astaghfirullah, Amina," he snapped. "What are you saying?" Tears burned my eyes. "I died, and I saw Him. He spoke to me. He showed me." "Enough!" My father's voice boomed through the room. "Do not say another word." The sheer force of it made me tremble, but I couldn't stay silent. I tried again. "You have to understand, He is real. Jesus is..." Smack. The slap stung across my cheek before I even realized what had happened. My mother's hand was still raised, her eyes wide and filled with tears and fear. "Stop," she whispered. "Please, stop." I stared at her, my heart breaking. She wasn't just angry, she was terrified. I turned to my husband, desperate. "You have to believe me, I saw Him, He told me." But the look in his eyes sent a chill through me. Cold, unforgiving, a wall slamming down between us. "If you say another word, Amina," he said, his voice eerily calm, "you will regret it." That night, I lay in my hospital bed, alone. No one spoke to me after that. My father barely looked at me. My mother sat in the corner, silently praying under her breath. My husband refused to stay in the room with me. They called it a miracle, but I knew the truth. It wasn't just a miracle. It was Jesus. I wanted to tell them all. But before I could even form the words, my mother gripped my hand tightly, her face still ashen. "Amina," she said, her voice shaking, "do not say anything reckless. Just thank Allah that He has given you back your life." My breath caught in my throat. She was already warning me, even though I hadn't spoken a word yet. But I had to tell them. I turned to my husband. "I saw something," I said softly. His jaw tensed. "What are you talking about?" I swallowed hard. My body still felt weak, but I forced myself to sit up, looking between my parents and my husband. "I saw Jesus." A heavy silence fell over the room. My father stiffened, his face darkening instantly. My mother flinched as if I had just cursed, and my husband, his face twisted in disbelief and anger. "Astaghfirullah, Amina," he snapped. "What are you saying?" Tears burned my eyes. "I died, and I saw Him. He spoke to me. He showed me." "Enough!" My father's voice boomed through the room. "Do not say another word." The sheer force of it made me tremble, but I couldn't stay silent. I tried again. "You have to understand, He is real. Jesus is..." Smack. The slap stung across my cheek before I even realized what had happened. My mother's hand was still raised, her eyes wide and filled with tears and fear. "Stop," she whispered. "Please, stop." I stared at her, my heart breaking. She wasn't just angry, she was terrified. I turned to my husband, desperate. "You have to believe me. I saw Him. He told me." But the look in his eyes sent a chill through me. Cold, unforgiving, a wall slamming down between us. "If you say another word, Amina," he said, his voice eerily calm, You will regret it. That night, I lay in my hospital bed, alone. No one spoke to me after that. My father barely looked at me. My mother sat in the corner, silently praying under her breath. My husband refused to stay in the room with me. Jesus, help me! Instantly, the weight lifted, the shadows shrieking, twisting, vanishing, as if they had been burned away by an invisible light. My body jerked, and suddenly I could move. I gasped, sitting up so fast I nearly fell off the hospital bed. My mother stirred in the chair across the room, her head lifting groggily. She had no idea what had just happened, but I knew. I had just escaped something dark, something evil. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't over. The next morning, I lay there, my body weak but my spirit on fire. I needed to tell them. I needed to warn them, even if they hated me, even if they rejected me. But how? I had already seen the way my family reacted. My husband had looked at me like I was a stranger. My father, his face had been filled with something I never thought I'd see from him toward me. Contempt. Would they ever listen? Could I even reach them? As these thoughts consumed me, I suddenly felt a presence in the room. Not darkness this time, not fear, peace, power. A warmth filled the air, wrapping around me like an unseen embrace. And then, a vision. The hospital room vanished. I was standing on a massive, endless desert plain. Before me, I saw countless people, dressed in white robes, their faces filled with joy, light, and life. But behind them, a massive crowd, dressed in chains. Their eyes were hollow, empty, lost. And they were walking toward something terrifying. A great abyss. The people in chains had no idea where they were going. They moved forward, talking, laughing, completely blind to the edge that awaited them. I turned, and Jesus stood beside me. His eyes were filled with sadness. I felt his voice before I even heard it. They do not know where they are going. I looked at the abyss again. It was so close. So many were about to fall. Panic surged through me. Jesus, we have to tell them, I cried. He turned to me, his expression both tender and urgent. That is why you are here. His words hit me like lightning. I chose you, Amina. I sent you back so they would know, but you must decide. Will you speak, or will you stay silent? Tears blurred my vision. This wasn't just a warning. This was a mission. I had been sent back for this reason, to tell them, to save as many as I could, even if they hated me for it, even if it cost me everything. I turned back to the people in chains, and in that moment, I knew I could not stay silent. I gasped as the vision ended, finding myself back in the hospital bed. Tears streamed down my face. I knew what I had to do, but the cost would be great. Already I had lost my husband's trust. My parents, I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew what this meant for me. Because in our culture, turning to Jesus was not just a belief change. It was a death sentence. Would I be cast out? Would I be killed? The fear was real. But so was the truth, and so was the urgency. I don't know who is listening to this right now. I don't know your story. I don't know what you've been through, the pain, the doubts, the fears. But I do know one thing. You were meant to hear this. This is not an accident. You could have clicked away. You could have ignored this. But something, someone, led you here. And I need you to understand. This is a warning, a final warning, because the time is short. When I was standing before Jesus, when he showed me that endless abyss, I realized something terrifying. Most people have no idea where they are going. They live their lives thinking they're safe, thinking they have time, thinking that religion, good works, or their own righteousness will save them. But I have seen the truth. Without Jesus, There is only one destination. Hell is real. I saw it. I felt it. And it is not an empty threat. It is a place of torment, of despair, of separation from God's presence. A place of finality. Once you go there, you cannot come back. And the scariest part, most people don't even realize they are headed there. They are walking toward destruction, laughing, talking, living their lives, completely blind to the edge beneath their feet. Maybe you think you have time. Maybe you think you'll deal with your soul later. Maybe you think, I'm a good person. I pray. I fast. I go to my place of worship. I follow my religion. I do what is right. But I need you to hear me. That is not enough. I was devout. I was a good Muslim. I prayed. I fasted. I obeyed every rule. And yet when I died, I did not see Allah. I did not see Muhammad. I saw Jesus, and he showed me the truth, that without him, we are lost. Not because God is cruel, not because he wants to send people to hell, but because we chose to reject the only salvation he gave us. Jesus is the only way, not one way among many, the only way. That's not just my opinion. That's what I was shown. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. I know this is hard to hear. I know this will offend many of you, but the truth does not change because we don't like it. And whether you accept it or not, one day you will stand before him. And on that day, there will be no more time for excuses, no more time for debates, no more second chances. Just one reality. You are either with Jesus or without him. You are either saved or lost. You are either entering eternal life or eternal darkness. Where will you stand? Don't push this away. Don't silence that voice inside of you that's urging you to listen. Because this is your chance. This is God calling you. Right now, he has been calling you your entire life. Through moments, through whispers, through people he sent your way, and now, through me. Because he loves you, more than you can ever comprehend. That is why he sent me back. Not for myself, not for fame, not for money, but for you. To tell you the truth before it's too late, to give you one last chance to decide. Because one day, this world will shake. One day, everything we trust in will collapse. And on that day, there will be no more time. Where will you stand? With Jesus or against him? This is your moment. Don't let it slip away. Choose him. Now.